All right. Speaking of extremely ugly, we have a big old culture war fight that normally Saagar and I typically avoid these like the plague, if we're being totally honest. However, this one has been embraced by the top of the GOP ticket, both by Donald Trump and JD Vance. And I have to tell you, it is one, we're going to try to have a non-stupid discussion about it. It is actually a topic that I find challenging and intellectually interesting. So let's go ahead and dig into it. There was a women's boxing match in the Olympics. We can go ahead and put some of these images up on the screen. We have an Italian boxer, Angela Carini, versus an Algerian boxer, Amani Khalif. And this match ended very quickly. The Italian boxer took a couple of blows and then she forfeited the fight. She came out tearfully, and we can actually put her comments up on the screen immediately afterwards, and talked about why she decided to withdraw. Here are her comments in full. She said, "My face and nose were hurting. I couldn't breathe anymore. I thought about my family. I looked at my brother in the stands and I went to my corner to retire. I've never been hit with such a powerful punch." She added that the withdrawal was not a premeditated move. All this controversy, she said, makes me sad. Later on, she said this, and she said she wanted to apologize to Amani for the controversy. And the controversy is that after this withdrawal, a bunch of people online, including J.K. Rowling, began speculating that Amani was actually a man. Now, first of all, they were saying she's transgender. She is 100% not transgender. We can put E4 up on the screen that has some of the details of this fight and what happened. So she was born a woman on her passport, raised a woman, etc. However, there was another boxing organization that at one point had disqualified Amani and another fighter as not meeting their gender criteria. Now, this boxing organization has come under a lot of scrutiny. It's called the International Boxing Association. The Olympic Committee actually kicked them out from regulating the sport and took over the sport because they had all kinds of corrupt dealings. One of the guys that was running it was this like Russian mob boss. Another person was super close to Putin, and it called into question this test that had allegedly found that Amani and another boxer who's also competing at the Olympics did not meet the gender criteria. And just to give you the backstory, I went too deep on this, but anyway, to give you the backstory here, Amani had just defeated a Russian fighter who at that point had been undefeated and was this very promising amateur coming up. So Amani's been fighting, no problem, in the women's category, raises woman, et cetera, et cetera. She beats this Russian boxer, and all of a sudden, this very closely Russian-tied organization disqualifies her and this other boxer for failing to meet their gender criteria. They told a Russian state-sponsored news organization that it was because she had an XY chromosome. However, since then, they haven't been willing to verify what the test was or really speak about it. The Olympic Committee is standing by Amani's classification as a woman. We haven't heard really from Amani herself, her full side of the story. In any case, this sparked a whole political freakout and really a kind of like online mob going after her for her, number one, not looking sort of traditionally female. Mm-hmm. Number two, this is just a total lie that she was transgender and sort of tying it into that debate. And then number three, wild speculation about things that we really don't know. It is possible that she has DSD, differences in sexual development, or she's, the other word for that is intersex. That is possible. That could have been indicated by this test. We don't know for sure. It's possible that she has some sort of a hormonal disorder, could be from DSD, that causes her to produce more testosterone. We don't know that either. So what you've ended up with is just a bunch of wild speculation. And what I've found, sort of offensive and has struck me as a former female athlete myself, difficult about it and disturbing about it, is the way that so much of it is just based on her appearance as not conforming to sort of traditional female beauty standards. And then just the fact that they're just completely lying that she's transgender when she is not, in fact, transgender.
Okay, I will say this. I blame that Italian lady because she's the one who heavily implied that she lost as a result of her opponent being transgender. Now, I'm not going to sit here and justify J.K. Rowling immediately coming out and not doing enough research. This is part of the problem, is that people want to sling takes and they want to take things at face value. And now all of a sudden, you know, they're like, oh, well, the IBA said it, the International Boxing Association. Nobody knows anything about the background. And of course, there's a political incentive in order to portray that. I guess one of the only reasons I'm willing to cut some slack here is that there have been instances previously in college athletics and elsewhere where transgender athletes were allowed to compete in women's sports. And they're obviously, well, I mean, it's a reality that was created that made it believable in the first place. That is not justifying people who are coming out and pushing these out, because I am not satisfied that there is any real evidence that this woman even has what you're talking about, that, what was it, DSD? As I understand it, she passed the quote-unquote gender test at the International Olympic Committee. I do understand, though, that the IOC and many of these countries have significant incentives sometimes to game the system, not just on gender, but to testosterone, you know, hormone therapy, etc. As we all learned at Sochi, countries are literally willing to go to extraordinary efforts to try and to deceive the Olympic Games. So I saw it within the context of people thought it was believable simply because it has literally happened, you know, previously, not only in combat sports, but also in other, you know, competitive athletics. I do feel bad for her, though, certainly, because just because somebody's created a reality where such an event would be certainly believable doesn't mean that she deserves to be victim of it.
Yeah, you know, it made me think a lot. And we've actually talked a little bit offline about this case of Caster Semenya, who is a sprinter and a runner. She's an extraordinary athlete. And she faced similar scrutiny. And it came out, and now, you know, I actually in some ways prefer to talk about Caster's case because we actually know the details, whereas with Imani, we genuinely don't know the details here. There's just rampant speculation. One thing we do know, she was identified female, but transgenderism is literally illegal in the country she's from, right? She was identified female at birth, so she has the visual genital appearance as a female, apparently. I love having to talk about these things. She was raised as a girl. There's pictures of her as a very girly-looking little girl with giant pink earrings. And in fact, she had huge obstacles to being able to train as a boxer because her dad didn't approve of girls boxing. She and her mom, she came from a very poor family in a very conservative part of Algeria. She and her mom sold scrap metal and would cook and sell the food to raise money for her training, and which she hid from her father because, as I said, he didn't approve because she was a girl. So it is heartbreaking to see the way that she has been, you know, unfairly attacked, smeared, lied about, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, the case of Caster Semenya, it does raise really difficult questions because she is intersex or has DSD. She visually, you know, if you just were looking at the external bits, she looks like a woman. However, she doesn't have some of the internal bits, fallopian tubes, ovaries, etc. And because of the way she was naturally born, she naturally produces more testosterone than is the quote unquote normal range for women. So what do you do with that? You know, this is a woman by most metrics, but she naturally produces more testosterone than your average woman. Okay, well, on the one hand, you say, okay, well, maybe that's not fair. But then you also think about there are many competitive advantages which don't seem particularly fair. I'm sure Michael Phelps' competitors didn't feel it was particularly fair that he's like, you know, built like a fish with this insanely freakishly long wingspan and double jointed ankles that allow him to get more propulsion out of his kick, and his body doesn't produce as much lactic acid as other athletes. He's another sort of genetic outlier, which of course, when you get to elite athletics, you're going to find almost everybody who's competing at this level is going to be some sort of a genetic outlier. So I guess part of what I don't have any easy answers for this, by the way. I think it's actually a very difficult question to figure out where you draw the line, because no matter where you draw the line, it's going to be unfair to someone, right? There is really no perfect answer. I think the answer also probably varies sport by sport. Like, for example, in boxing, you know, we've obviously decided it's not fair to have some giant person fighting against some tiny person. So they instituted weight categories. because you're not just losing a race, you're in the possibility of getting injured, getting hurt. And so that adds a level of care and concern about unfair advantages that could be dangerous to your competitor. So I think it could be different sport by sport. But I guess my big takeaway here is that a lot of the discourse on the right is very simplistic, just like women should be fighting women and men should be fighting men. And cases like Caster Semenya, and potentially, although we don't know, cases like Imani Khalif shows that nature doesn't actually draw a really clear and obvious line. Usually, yes, in 99.9% of cases, it's very obvious. But especially in elite athletics, you're going to have these edge cases, these borderline cases that are really difficult and aren't really black and white. So
yeah. But I think it's a very different case. Here you have somebody who's born naturally. Again, we don't know, okay? The IBA apparently claimed that they say they have evidence. I don't know. They should release it, okay? Maybe the IOC should come out and clarify the situation too, just to make it very clear. But it's very different when you're born naturally and then when you're taking exogenous hormones. Or if you're not taking exogenous hormones and you just happen to identify as female and you compete in female athletics. I think it's a totally different situation. And that's what people are reacting to. And I mean, again, to be fair, this literally happened. The whole Leah Thomas situation. We have sprinters and other situations that happen here in the United States. So people are primed to believe it because it's a reality that was created, frankly, by elite liberalism who thinks that this is somehow justifiable. So my line is quite simple. If it's natural, I mean, I guess, if it's natural, it's within the conversation. If it's not natural, then no, I don't think it should be in the conversation. I don't think exogenous hormones should be legal, really, period, whenever it comes to elite athletics. Lance Armstrong is a good example of why, you have somebody naturally who had a quote-unquote advantage, but then gets disqualified for taking exogenous substances. Now, Michael Phelps, I forget exactly what his genetic mutation was, but it is something that is born of nature. And so I just think it's quite a simple conversation, I guess, within this. And the reality is that there was an entire thing created over the last decade of, if, let's say this woman was transgender, then I think the left would be like, yeah, that's completely fine, or they would ignore it. So in a sense, I don't know if it's necessarily the same controversy.
Well, it's definitely not the same controversy, except that people lied about this person and said she was transgender to try to fit it into the same controversy, right?
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And, I don't think that was responsible.
I mean, here's why it is related, though, because you're talking about, innate characteristics and where is the line that you're going to draw between the two genders. And so I don't know that anyone would argue, maybe there's some person out there that would argue it, but I certainly wouldn't argue. I don't know anybody else on the left that would argue. It would be enough to just say, oh, I feel like I'm a woman now and, get to compete in female athletics. The conversation is about, okay, is there a process by which if you transition over a number of years and you are, suppressing your testosterone levels and it's been a certain period of time, is there a time period in which, okay, now it's all right for you to compete? Or is it just if you went through puberty as a biological male, do you have too much of a competitive advantage to ever, for it ever to be fair for you to compete against women? And I do think that that's a difficult, because it wouldn't be fair to just say, no, that's it, you just can't compete, period, end of story, you're done, right? And on the other hand, I think that certain sports, like, for example, I think, what was it? It was like a pool player or something who quit because she was up against a transgender woman. It's like, your gender doesn't even confer any sort of advantage. So in certain sports, yes, I think that it's like boxing, I think would be one of them, where if you went through puberty as a biological male, you probably have advantages that even if you've been taking, hormone suppression and medically transitioned for years, that you're not going to be able to just totally put in the background. But there are other sports where it may not make as much of a difference. That's why I'm saying it's a complicated question, and also why it could vary sport by sport, and why the fact that you have these naturally occurring edge cases makes it really clear that it is not a black and white question, that sex, even, just naturally occurring differences create these edge cases that actually, when you come down to it, makes it very difficult to draw that line of, who goes in which category, et cetera. And
yeah, but this is a yes but question. This is a yes. So yes, there are 0.00001 occurrences, people like this, in which it will manifest in elite athletics. But the puberty conversation, the data is incredibly clear. If you went through puberty as a biological male, then the natural differences that you have are immense. There has been tons of research on this. It doesn't matter if you've been on hormone blockers for 5 years, just in terms of your muscle development, what the amount of testosterone that you had that could contribute to growing larger, etc. Friend of mine, Derek, More Plates, More Dates, has done extensive research on this and put out a lot of videos that are on the subject. You can go and watch them for yourself. So I really just think it's totally different, Krystal. I mean, we're talking here, we're almost seems like, well, just because there's a 0.001% edge case, that means that the modern phenomenon of transgenderism and trans ideology isn't somehow comparable. I don't think that's the case at all. And then that also, when you say difficult question, then that even raises the idea that you can put puberty blockers in a child and not allow them to go through puberty in their natural gender, which I think is frankly disgusting and abhorrent. I would personally be for banning it if I could. I don't know if the public would necessarily be on my side. I know that in Europe, they've certainly gone in a different direction. So I don't think that this conversation is really related in any way to a natural phenomenon, and then the specific choice, frankly, by parents who are deciding to plug children and chemically castrate them with chemicals. That is just not even in the same league of conversation to me.
So to stick with the conversation about the athletics, the other thing I would say is just this has been made into like such a top political issue on the right, and it hasn't succeeded in terms of, I think, on the public opinion, it's succeeded. If you poll people, majority will say, yes, I don't think that transgender women should be able to participate in women's athletics. But there were a lot of candidates who really leaned into this topic in the midterms, and it was not successful. And so it was sort of dropped for the agenda. Now it's been picked up, because of this debate about this Olympic women's boxing match. It's been picked up by JD Vance and Donald Trump, who very much do want to make it about transgender women, even though this woman is not transgender at all. So they've been using this rhetoric on the campaign trail. This is, what do we have here? E3. Let's go ahead and run this shot.
We think it's weird that the far left wants to allow biological males to beat the living crap out of women in boxing.
I used to use the barbells. I thought, now all you have to do is look at the boxers. This young girl from Italy, a champion boxer, she got hit so hard she didn't know what the hell hit her. It's a person that transitioned. He was a good male boxer. Yeah, he was a good male boxer. And she didn't even go down. He hit her with 2 jabs, and she said, I'm out.
So anyway, that's all just, that's a lie. She did not transition. She was not a gray male boxer. She was born a woman. She has competed as a woman. There is this question about the test. We don't know the details, but that is all a complete lie. So there's the political aspect of this. But, I'll just say with regard to part of why I don't think the transgender sports debate has been the politically salient issue that Republicans at one point thought it would be, and why I take these 2 examples once again of like them sort of flailing around and not really knowing how to run against Kamala Harris at this point. In fact, I saw someone online who tweeted like, Donald Trump is losing, so they had to make up that this boxer is transgender. But part of why I think that this has not been salient is because, like, look at the Olympics now. Katie Ledecky is the dominant female swimmer. She's a woman. This looming threat of destroying female athletics, et cetera, like it just hasn't come true. There have been a few cases like Leah Thomas that I think have been, nationally very sensational. Leah Thomas isn't at the Olympics, right? So as a salient issue that impacts people frequently in their lives, you've got states that are passing bans on transgender athletes that have like one transgender athlete in their entire state. So I think it's a much greater threat to women's athletics to the extent that any of these people actually care about that at all outside of like creating this culture war issue. I think the greater threat is stoking these online lynch mobs to judge women by their appearance and hold up whether or not they meet the standard that they think that they should look like, and then smearing them internationally accordingly.
Krystal, the reason Leah Thomas is not in the Olympics is apparently because she lost in the World Aquatics governing, court of arbitration that would have not allowed her to compete. So it's not that she wasn't competing against Katie Ledecky. It's because she legally was not allowed to compete in the Olympics.
Katie would kick her ass, but anyway.
Maybe, I don't know. Look.
She's got the top 20 fastest times in the 1500 freestyle that have ever existed.
Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. I think seeing her, him, whatever up on the dais, frankly, is disgusting. And that is something that I deeply object to. Now, on the transgender point, the reason I don't think that it was politically salient is because it was in the context of abortion. In a vacuum, as you said, polls dramatically agree that transgender athletes should not be allowed to compete in women's sports. And in some governing bodies where they have been allowed to compete, you had the grotesque outcome of people like Leah Thomas and weightlifters and others that are competing against women. You've had athletes like Riley Gaines and others who have spoken out about this, and by the way, faced significant social consequences as a result of that within their university. After she quit, and had to make this her. Now, by the way, I don't recommend making this your whole identity. There's a reason that I conduct myself the way that I do, but if forced to discuss, certainly will. The vast majority of the American public agrees on this issue. And by forcing, people like Leah Thomas and others, you just frankly create this grotesque spectacle, which sets back, as I have told my gay friends, the quote unquote gay marriage polling numbers that we have seen within the GOP. Now, abortion is always going to be a lot more salient issue. Now, after that's solved, maybe we can tackle the puberty debate. And I think it's going to be very different on the polling and political salience with abortion off the table. But of course, there's a ton more women who exist in America, so it's going to be a lot more politically important. But in a vacuum, I don't think it's nearly as unpopular as you're laying out.
I didn't say it was unpopular. I'm just saying that people don't care that much.
They don't. Frankly, you shouldn't care that much.
Instances.
I don't particularly care that much. But
there's so few instances, and that's the thing. That's what I'm trying to get at, Saagar. Is look at the Olympics. Look at the female stars: Sha'Carri Richardson, Simone Biles, Katie Ledecky. None of these people are threatened by transgender athletes. There is, just to throw another wrinkle in this, there actually is one self-identifying transgender male who is boxing but hasn't taken hormones or whatever and just changed their pronouns and is boxing as a woman. I think I'm getting these details right. But there's very few transgender athletes even at the Olympics. So again, my point is not that this, I actually think probably the most fair thing, if you had sufficient numbers, is to have separate categories for transgender athletes. But I think that's practically difficult because the few numbers. Because I agree with you that I think if you go through puberty as a biological male, it does confer certain advantages that even if you've been taking hormone, suppressants for many years, are not going to just magically go away. I just object to this being such a fixation and focus and the demonization of, this boxer, or now apparently anyone who doesn't. There's another boxer, by the way, who's in the same category, anyone who doesn't fit this ideal. I just find that to be so gross. And I do take it kind of personally just because, I'm a former athlete. I wasn't going to the Olympics, but I was a Division I swimmer. It was a big part of my identity. And, when you are a high-level athlete, oftentimes as a woman, you do have some characteristics that are not traditionally feminine. If you look at the swimmers, right? Really broad shoulders, flat chests because you're more aerodynamic, big lats. I've always been able to put on a lot more muscle than other women. And so if you're creating a situation where now there are these online lynch mobs of people judging whether you're feminine enough, like they did to Caster Semenya, Duty Chand, Imani Khalif now, to me, that's far more damaging to women's athletics than these, very few cases of transgender athletes that I also, like I said, I also have issues with and have questions about. But, it's they're sort of killing they're doing more damage to the thing that they're claiming to protect. And I do wonder what you make of the Trump comments where he just lies about her. Do you think that this is a smart political direction for Trump and JD Vance to go in, embracing this culture war question over the Algerian
I don't think
boxer.
people will really care. I mean, the American people are on their side, regardless of whether this is true or not. If it was a transgender athlete, then yeah, I mean, most people. Look, it is not all that politically salient. Like I said, if forced to discuss, I'll lay out, what I think is a pretty clear case of why this is gross. I don't think that is nearly as damaging. The left created a reality where men are literally allowed to compete in women's sports, biological men. So then you can't get upset when people are like, hey, is this a biological man or not? And then if they were,
of course you can when the information is there and you're just flat out lying.
Okay, but if it was a biological man, people would say, oh, what a great celebration, that this is an amazing outcome of, transgender equality. It's like you can't simultaneously cheer on like bearded guys in dresses and then say like, oh, we shouldn't be able to criticize the whatever, like female aesthetics. I mean, this is a reality that was created literally by modern liberalism post Obergefell, which I think was a massive mistake as we look at the political polling that has now happened both on gay marriage and on the transgenderism issue. So I almost feel, frankly, like gaslit on this conversation, because if you create an entire reality where everything is questionable and then people ask questions, you can't get upset about that.
But it was readily apparent. It was readily available information that this was not a transgender person. So I just don't think it's fair to just give a pass to these big accounts and J.K. Rowling and the freaking former president of the United States. Like, well, it's not his fault because somebody else, did something that he didn't like once. The facts exist out there. You are able to, absorb them and read articles about what's going on and assess it accurately and have empathy for this person and not just go on this nasty, like, demonization kick and make her into some sort of political fodder. So I think just like excusing them as, oh, it's not really their fault. I find that preposterous. But the last thing, just to tie up like what we know about this and the reaction from the Italian boxer who, going back and reading her initial comments, I know a lot of people, and you were saying like you really blame her for sort of spreading. I don't know that that's really fair, because all she said is just like she'd never been hit that hard. She didn't say that Amani shouldn't be able to fight or she was a man or whatever. So I don't know if it's really fair to put it all on her. But in any case, we have her final comments where she was talking about how she would actually apologize to Amani. She says, it wasn't something I intended to do. Actually, I want to apologize to her and everyone else. I was angry because my Olympics had gone up in smoke. She added if she bet Khalif again, she would embrace her. So in any case, just kind of a wild situation that really touched a cultural nerve and has now been embraced by the former president of the United States, in spite of the fact that some of the very basics of the situation have been nothing but lies and innuendo.
All right. Well, let's see what the developments are. Maybe a gender test. I believe that people are demanding she take a gender test, so maybe we'll see. Perhaps we'll get the truth. I don't know. Did they have to pass a gender test to even compete in the IOC? This is where I'm confused. This governing body, like, what are the rules? What do they even say?
Yeah, so I think that the Olympic Committee, as best as I was able to understand, they don't conduct chromosomal tests. And so typically, again, this is my layman's understanding of doing one day of research.
Yes.
Typically, I believe they allow these various sports governing bodies to sort of legislate themselves. So previously, they had been relying on this International Boxing Association. However, there were it was legitimately very sketchy organization and tied into the drug trade and Russian mobsters, whatever. It was kind of a mess. So they banned them from allying with them. And the Olympic Committee themselves put together a temporary committee to adjudicate these types of questions. From my reading, it was not entirely clear to me what they based their assessments on. The thing that they said is that she was born a woman. She's, woman on her driver's license, woman on her passport, et cetera. And so I don't know if I don't think that they have like a testosterone limit. And I don't know that they conducted these same sort of, potential chromosomal tests. Now in track and field, where this was relevant for Caster Semenya, they decided that for certain events, not all events, but for certain events, high levels of testosterone were a sufficient advantage that they set a maximum bar for what your testosterone levels can be, even if you're in all other respects, present as a female. So Caster Semenya, in order to compete in some of her top events, was forced to take testosterone suppressants in order to be able to compete. And she's written about how it made her really sick and she hated doing it. And ultimately she stopped taking those testosterone suppressants. So different sports, it seems like, have different criteria. And I guess one question I have for you is, okay, so let's say that she does have DSD and she does have XY chromosome, even though, she, physically presented as a female. Do you think that she should compete as a woman or not?
I don't think so. I just think that the risk is too high for people in boxing. Whenever you're literally hitting somebody else in the head, that's the red line. And running, I would switch it from track and field to anything where you could potentially harm somebody.
I actually agree with that.
Yeah.
But then I was thinking about if you reverse it. Let's say you have someone who presents as a male, but who they have, the male bits externally, but they have XX chromosome. Do they get to compete as a female?
Is that possible? I don't think that is.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know that there are 30 different,
my elementary biology is starting to come back to me.
There are 30 different ways of being intersex. So is that one of them? I can't say I'm 100% sure. But, again, that's why I think it varies sport to sport. I think it's very difficult. I tend to think I disagree with the Caster Semenya decision. I think her naturally high levels of testosterone, I think that's just a natural genetic advantage in the same way that many athletes have natural genetic advantages and no one's getting hurt, to your point. But I agree with your point that in fighting, that's why you have different weight categories. There's an added level of we need to protect these, individuals as much as we can. And so, an advantage, like if you have an elevated level of testosterone, which is probably going to occur more often. Like I bet if you tested a lot of these women competing in Olympic boxing, like they're probably at the high end of normal or beyond the high range of normal because it is an advantage there. So, maybe you have, in addition to the weight classes, maybe you have like a high testosterone class. Maybe that's the most fair thing to do here.
I know at least amongst men, there's like physiological doses and there's like super physiological. So somebody who is far more well-versed in hormones can weigh in here. We do have Jordan Sheridan standing by though, Krystal, so we should get to him.
All right, let's get to that.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.